Good evening. Is that very loud? Is that all right? Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Planning Subcommittee meeting. My name is Councillor Barbara Blake. I'm the chair of this committee. If I can get members to introduce themselves, starting on my left, please.
Reg Rice, Councillor for Tottenham Hill.
Ejder Ovat, Councillor for Northumberland Park.
Lester Buxton, Councillor for Crouch End.
Alex Worrell, Stroud Green.
Mark White, Councillor for Tottenham Central.
Luke Corley Harrison, Councillor for Crouch End.
George Dunstall, Stroud Green.
Nicola Bartlett, West Green.
Thank you. If the officers present could introduce themselves, please, starting on my left.
Justin Farley, Legal Officer.
Rob Czasowski, Assistant Director for Planning, Building Standards and Sustainability.
Robbie McDocker, Head of Development Management and Planning Enforcement.
Tanya Skelly, Deputy Team Leader.
John McRory, Major Applications Team Leader.
Alex Fraser, Tree and Nature Conservation Manager.
And Fiona Ray, Principal Committee Coordinator, Clerk to the Committee.
Thank you. And we do have some officers in attendance virtually, and they'll introduce themselves when relevant. So we're now on to item 1, which is filming at meetings. Please note this meeting is being recorded. All registered speakers should be aware that they will be recorded for live or subsequent broadcast via the council's internet site or by anyone attending the meeting. So we're on to item 2, which is planning protocol. Members and speakers are requested to note the information set out at item 2 on the agenda. So please could you note that information there. We have apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Bevan. We have no items of urgent business, and we're on to declarations of interest. So do members have any declarations of interest? No? Okay. Thank you. Item 6, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of November 2022 and the 5th of December 2022. These are for approval and they're in the supplementary agenda. Do we approve the minutes? Thank you. So we're now on to the planning applications, and the first one is item 8. And this is various locations on the public highway in the London Borough of Haringey. In the pack, it's pages 1 to 100, and the reference is 1906. I won't read out all of the proposal, but it's the installation of street furniture comprising pairs of 76mm dia steel tubes, poles linked with 1.6mm clear nylon filament and similar street furniture to delineate a local Jewish Eruv. So the recommendation is to grant. So I'd like to hand over now to the planning officer, Tanya Skelly, to introduce the application. Tanya.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, members. I'll just repeat very briefly the development description. Is the installation of street furniture comprising pairs of 76mm diameter steel tubes linked with 1.6mm clear nylon filament and similar street furniture to delineate a local Jewish Eruv. This is proposed across various locations on the public highway in the London Borough of Haringey. The planning application is proposed by the Haringey, Muswell Hill and Highgate Eruv. An eruv is a boundary or enclosure recognized by Jewish law within which carrying is permitted. This includes wheelchairs, prams, and personal items. The proposed eruv boundaries aim to link with existing eruvs in adjoining boroughs of Barnet and Camden, comprising the Camden, North West London, and Woodside Park eruvs. The proposal includes various locations for poles and other street furniture on public highway land across Haringey, Camden, and Islington, with 19 locations within the boundaries of Haringey. Sorry. So this plan in front of you shows the proposed Haringey and Muswell Hill eruv with the locations within Haringey on the right and bottom right, and on the left as well on the boundary with Camden, and a few other locations within Islington. To the top, we can see the blue line, which shows the Woodside Park eruv, the borough boundary, and the green line is the Northwest London eruv. This map shows various other roofs, which I mentioned before, with Haringey roughly here. This shows the various other roofs that it would link to, specifically Camden here to the left, and the Northwest London eruv to the west, and Woodside Park to the north. The proposal is the large majority of the notional enclosure required for an eruv utilizes existing walls and fences. For those areas where there are no walls and fences to create that, height of pole, if 5.5 meter high poles are proposed. Street furniture comprising pairs of 76 millimeter diameter steel tubes linked with 1.6 millimeter clear nylon filament is proposed. The narrowest possible diameter pole is chosen to minimize visual impact. This is an example of a set of poles, which hopefully you can see where I'm pointing to. There are 2 poles with a filament in between, and this is to the entrance. This is within Camden on Ellsworthy Terrace at the entrance to Primrose Hill from the south. And this is showing a close-up of one of the poles and how it's designed, and a filament, a nylon filament stretching from it. About the choice of locations. So the boundary of each eruv is carefully researched by the applicant to minimize number of poles and their visual impact. Final locations were agreed with highways and conservation. Revisions to selected proposed locations were accepted as a result. The main considerations with the application are visual impact, highways, ecology, protection of community garden, conservation, and equalities. With regards to visual impact, I am sharing a technical drawing of how a standard pair of poles would look like, with 2 poles and a filament in between. And for example, one of the lower poles, a 1 meter high one, right here. This is an example of an arch, a metal arch proposed at one of the locations. You can see this better on page 56 in your pack. And sorry, the previous one is on page 70. And this is an example of a site next to a community garden that was mentioned by residents. And so here, for example, we have consulted highways and parks, and we have, in agreement with the applicant, relocated the proposed pole from the original location to further away from the gate. The technical drawing can also show that it is set, that is, it's installed, it's proposed to be installed at the edge of the curb, quite right next to the fence, and retaining as a result the existing width of the pavement. This is a drawing of the two poles on the right here, showing the locations of both and how the filament will stretch in between. The legal agreement also includes highways obligations to secure the installation, maintenance, and other relevant issues to do with highways to make sure that it is all according to standards. This is another location where ecology issues were involved. This is the park. This is a location on Parkland Walk. This is showing one of the locations, one of the sides of a location before and after, with the pole and a fence. We had an ecology report submitted, which assessed impact on bats and birds, and following assessment by Nature Conservation and Parks, it was considered acceptable, subject to a condition to secure a further bat survey. A condition to secure the protection of trees is also included in the recommendation. This is a map showing the location on the Parkland Walk. This is another example of a location next to the Parkland Walk location, but outside of it. And it is showing a location without the pole and with the pole below. Another example of a location, just to walk you through a few, before and after, with a 1 meter pole painted in a color to match the existing surroundings. And I think this might be a final example. Again, next to a conservation, a nature conservation, but outside of it, where originally we had a metal arch proposed over the access to the nature reserve, which was subsequently replaced due to maintenance issues with a pole. So this is before and this is after with the pole. One more location, looking at conservation. This is where one of the locations where we involved the conservation officer. Right next, this is on Hampstead Lane, right next to Kenwood House, on the boundary with London Borough of Camden, where we have a heritage phone box and a pole proposed right behind it. With regards to equalities and the Section 106 legal agreement, an equalities assessment was carried out, which concluded that the ERUV benefits a recognized minority and results in no harm to the wider community, including no harm to LGBT groups or other secular beliefs. A legal agreement is proposed to include a community engagement plan, which is being drafted with the Haringey Multi-Faith Forum. Another obligation is recommended to secure highway license, including installation, maintenance, liability, and costs details. The proposal is not considered to harm neighboring amenities, and several other issues raised, none of which are considered to outweigh the benefits of the proposal. Accordingly, the proposal is recommended for approval, subject to conditions and a legal agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. So do members have any questions, any clarification questions of the planning officer, please? So Councillor Wright.
Yes, Chair, I simply want to know what's the real benefit to the Jewish community of this installation.
The benefit is in being able to carry items within the public domain, within the boundaries of the proposed roof. That includes items such as people in wheelchairs, children in prams, and also carrying personal items.
So without this installation, you couldn't carry a bag of shopping. Is that what it is?
Correct, to my understanding.
Councillor Brennan.
I understand that you've put beads on some of the poles where you thought they needed to be visible for birds. Is that correct?
Correct, I should have mentioned that. So that's the location 22. I can go back to it. It's the location on Parkland Walk. And following comments and with the parks officer, we tried to find the best solution to protect bats and birds. And it was the filament was proposed to be installed with beads on it to make it more visible and apparent to wildlife.
So I have a little follow-up. So we're sure we don't need to do the same on any of the others, because it does seem like it's nearly invisible, and birds and bats and such like will be flying around wherever.
Correct, but it was felt necessary in the nature reserve only.
Thank you. Any other comments? No? Okay, thank you. So we now move to the objectors. Mr. Paul McDonald, are you here? Mr. McDonald, could you come forward, please? Just hold on 1 minute. So you have 3 minutes, sir, starting from now, if you want to switch on your microphone. Thank you.
My name's Paul McDonald from Stroud Green. There's no time to mention over 14 environmental conflicts which have already been submitted. Prominent amongst those, the conservation area, the Parkland Walk, the threat to our highway, bearing in mind that I haven't had the latest submissions. And from this provenly dangerous fishing line from lots of other research. The local community gardens will be destroyed or diminished despite the Greenest Borough initiative. There's going to be a massive proliferation of street furniture, which contradicts the streetscape manual, particularly around Fern Park Road. Locals overwhelmingly oppose because religious symbols belong on synagogues, mosques and churches, not outside in our secular public space. An Eruv converts our public space in this diverse community into a single sect religious domain, with local residents feeling as intruders, damaging harmony. That's why Tower Hamlets approved Brick Lane Minaret, but not the Bangletown Arch. Haringey is predominantly secular, especially Stroud Green. Jews number less than 2%, with United Synagogues maybe only 700 or 0.2% of the population. Support for this contentious proposal emerged only after 2 to 3 weeks in a coordinated identikit flurry from outside boroughs after synagogue intervention. All claimed the 5.5 metre poles, which actually 6.5 metre with a footing, which are 2.5 stories high, were unobtrusive. Maybe they should have gone to Specsavers. Anyway, as we see it, the local government role is to ensure that local community voices are heard and valued on important issues and not outside interests. As for the planning, we believe the application initially was fairly sloppy. There were a lot of incorrect scales on the drawings. Key planning issues initially were not addressed. There was no environmental impact survey, and bird danger was poo-pooed without any research initially. Ironically, there's an appeal to the Equality Act 2010 stressing inclusivity, whereas United Synagogue themselves deny these to women and support a homophobic legal code. In fact, United Synagogues, despite claiming to be representative, is a 15% rump of the Jewish community. They are generally regarded as divisive, insisting on their exclusive interpretations of halakhic law, which are contentious, for example, the need for a fishing line. To me, as a Gentile, this input comes from learned Jewish neighbours, one of whom feels disenfranchised and was actually too nervous to appear this evening in support. Also, the planning process was seriously defective. The planning officer had a perceived conflict of interest. The notification in the dead month of August was chaotic, inadequate, and at times dangerous because of the placing of the signs on very, very narrow roads. We believe that compromise is always available to rational people. For example, the Bevis Marks Islington application proposes using predominantly existing street furniture, as in the USA. Stamford Hill, Erev, which was launched in May 20, uses maps and apps. So if you really must approve this device, I urge you to save the environment, just fix notice the bridges with no fishing line, which is good enough as Stamford Hill Erev, which is a 38% Jewish.
Thank you, Mr. MacDonald.
Yeah.
That's your 3 minutes up. Thank
you.
you. The committee can ask questions of the objectors. So, Councillor Worrell.
Thank you. You made reference to community gardens being diminished. Could you clarify which parts you mean?
By Crouch Hill Station, I hear that there's been some change, but that wasn't notified to me because I haven't been kept informed. I was only told of this meeting 6 working days ago, and other neighbours were only told three days ago. So we weren't made aware of what changes were made. So it's only just now Ms. Skelly has said something about them. There are 2 gardens now. One is to the west side of the northwest side of the Crouch Hill Railway Bridge, and the other, which is being further developed, is on the other side, on the northeast side, and they're tended by the local population, and they've received a lot of acclaim because a lot of people walk to the station and it brightens their day. And obviously I've got stinging nettles there, lots of butterflies have started coming, so it is within the biodiversity, which is supposedly part of Haringey's declaration, for biodiversity in the Greenest Borough Initiative. Does that answer the question? Thank you.
Councillor Dunstall.
Yeah, thank you. You made reference to the poles being 5.5 metres, but extending to 6.5. I didn't catch exactly what you said. I wondered if you could
Are
provide
they floating or
some further.
How are they fixed? So you have a pole which is 5.5 metres. Building regulations needs between 15 and 20% footing, which means that in terms of carbon footprint, concrete, what have you, which will affect things like the community gardens, you've got to go down 1 metre. So in terms of the energy used, the carbon footprint of steel over whatever is 33 poles is quite extreme. And again, in terms of, zero emissions, this is running in the wrong direction when you could literally have, like in the Erev and Stamford Hill, you just have a signpost on all those bridges. You don't need the fishing line. There are lots of different interpretations of halakhic law.
So for clarity, the poles are 5.5 metres from
High.
the ground.
High, but length is 6.5.
Right, okay, thank you.
Councillor Worrell.
This is a genuine, not a facetious question. Your kind of reference to having religious items in public spaces and things like that. Why do you perceive this as different to having, say, like a Christmas tree in the Crouch End Square?
Christmas tree is
like
pagan, actually.
Yeah, but it has a sort of significance to a religion, doesn't it?
Well, first of all, Christmas trees would be accepted by probably 70 or 80% of the community. Here we're talking about a fairly large imposition over a large area, which is predominantly 99.5% not belonging to the US. That's the United Synagogues. And it is in your face. There have been a number of arguments about not being obtrusive. 5.5 meters is the same as a 2.5 story house. It's very, very big. And some of the pictures that were in the initial plans, they were deliberately, I would imagine, put in such a way that you couldn't see them because there was the photos were taken with a backdrop of trees. So they were very, very unclear on the planning application. But when I actually tried out and did a bamboo pole, in fact, I had to have 3 bamboo poles in order to work out how tall it was. It was about 2 meters higher than the existing street furniture.
Councillor Rice.
Yeah, when in your address to the committee, you said that the planning officer had a serious conflict of interest. What was that conflict?
The planning officer is a co-religionist living in an eruv, and if you look at the Conflict of Interest Act of 2018, a perceived conflict of interest is sufficient that she should really have recused herself, because she has a sympathy, I would imagine, for that particular application, particularly bearing in mind if you look at what's in the public domain, for example, on Facebook. Sorry?
Are you referring to the current planning
The
officer?
one whose name was on the original application that in August, who actually at that point was on holiday and didn't answer any of the emails, and then the bounce back email gave an incorrect email. So it was very difficult at that time to communicate, because the initial planning time was given as something like 2.5 weeks during this dead month of August. So it was very, very difficult. Fortunately, after protesting, that planning period was extended, but the initial planning period was extremely short. And as I say, the key thing is not a pecuniary interest, it's a perceived conflict of interest.
Just switch off your microphone. Thank you. I'm just going to bring Rob Shizowski in.
Thank you. Always happy to receive any evidence on conflicts of interest and things like that. But we have professional officers, and it's not just one officer working on it. There's a whole team of officers that sign off these reports and sign off the recommendation to committee tonight. So I'm not. There are no conflicts of interest here.
Thank you. Councillor Buxton.
Thank you. So going back to the point of them being religious symbols in public domain, is there anything on the poles or the wires that denotes them as being religious beyond, for a lay person, beyond if you knew what they were there for?
Obviously, by now, we all know what they mean. And in that sense, it's, Stroud Green, where I live, is actually, believe it or not, the godless capital of United Kingdom. The non-believer rate is 42%, which I think is the highest anywhere in the country. The key objection in that sense is the environmental one of, why would you need this monstrous pole which really sticks out in a conservation area, which you wouldn't allow for any other reason, particularly when it goes against, as I said, the streetscape manual of proliferation of street furniture. There's already lots of street furniture which could be used alternatively, and that's the practice mainly in the US. Secondly, as I say, that it's not necessary. There are eruvs which, like in Stamford Hill, which don't use that. So it's a mixture. When I was in the street, I've talked to probably over 100 people, many of whom are non-believers. Some are Jewish, some are pagan, some are Muslim. And generally speaking, they say, well, we don't want these religious symbols, not in, a church, mosque, whatever, fine, but actually in the public domain, because it's also the principle of having someone claiming, and this is basically what it says in the law, as I understand, is that this private domain, a public domain, becomes a private domain in which, because they don't use key locks or electronics, they can't carry their keys, things which to us seem fairly arcane. So the idea that you should spoil the environment for these rather strange beliefs to us as Gentiles.
Yeah, that wasn't my question. Was simply, is there anything that denotes these poles as anything different from, say, a telephone pole? Is there any Star of David? Is there any religious symbol?
No, there's not.
Thank you.
No, there's not that.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So, any more questions? No. Okay. If you'd like to take your seat, Mr. MacDonald. And can I ask the applicant supporters to come forward and address the committee, please? I think we have Mr. Daniel Rosenfelder and Rabbi Nikki Liss. Is that correct? So you both have 3 minutes, which is the same time as to address the committee. Sorry, and then we'll have questions afterwards. So, okay, so
A total of 3 minutes.
pardon? A total of 3 minutes. Yes. Okay. Starting now, more or less.
My name is Daniel Rosenfelder. I'm an architect in practice in Hampstead and have dealt with over 25 planning consents for Eruv street furniture. The first Eruv was approved in 2004, since when 18 have been installed in and around London, in Manchester, Leeds and Westcliff, and others at application stage, including one in the city. Both Highgate and Muswell Hill Jewish communities are very active in multi-faith, food bank and other cross-community activities. This application will provide the life-changing benefits of an Eruv and link them to adjoining Eruvs in Camden and northwest London, as well as Woodside Park to the north. The boundary extends into Camden and Islington. Camden have approved their section, and the Islington decision is imminent with officer support. The Eruv concept is well described in your officer's report and in the design and access statement. It requires a notional boundary comprising existing buildings, walls and fences. Where roads or footpaths cross the boundary, Jewish law accepts a simple pair of poles linked with very thin wire to form a quasi-open gate to maintain the boundary continuity. The poles have no religious significance whatever. They simply maintain the requisite boundary to allow very young and wheelchair users and their carers to leave home on Friday evening and Saturday for social, leisure, religious and community activities which they can't do at present. An Eruv doesn't relax any other prohibitions such as use of cars or any form of transport, so there's no question of any traffic generation. The many Eruvs in existence demonstrate no impact or on any other section of the local population, nor do they in any way affect social cohesion. The installed poles are in fact barely discernible in the streetscape, nor is any evidence of harm to any wildlife. Despite this, special measures are agreed in sensitive areas, as in Parkland Walk, with this application. Section 149 of the 210 Equality Act requires local authorities to support prescriptive characteristics of minority groups. Sabbath observance is a prescriptive characteristic of traditional Judaism. The design and access statement quotes many supporting references in your own and in national planning policies. This area is particularly significant as it includes Whittington Hospital and several care homes serving a large catchment where areas exist. It will hugely facilitate Saturday visits by all family members and also permit bringing personal items such as food, medicines and clothes, having a very positive impact on patients both at Whittington and the Royal Free. Of wider public benefit, it allows patient discharge on Saturdays, currently impeded for observant patients. For all the above reasons and the detailed comments and recommendations in your officer's report, it is hoped members will support this application.
Thank you. Have you finished? Okay, all right. We've got questions, so they'll be okay. So members, any questions to the applicant, please? So Councillor Buxton and Councillor.
Yeah, following the what the objector said, why exactly are the poles necessary, and why could it not be done so that the nylon thread was strung between walls, houses, etc.?
Poles are taken so that the installation is independent of any private. It's all on public land, and in fact, in some occasions, people have offered their own properties to fix the wire to, in which case a pole is not required. We try to avoid that if we can, because of course, if it's attached to a property, it involves a legal agreement to retain the wire in position. But we have, in fact, in Camden, we've got four local residents offered for the wire to be fixed to their homes, and we had an agreement with them, and the poles were able to be omitted. But this is relatively rare, and we prefer to be, because of the maintenance of the entire installation is done by the applicant, we rather keep it as a single unit rather than split or split for access purposes and others. It's simpler if it's that way. But we don't mind as long as the wire maintains the boundary.
Chair, sorry, just as a follow-up to that, does that not mean, might be a naive question, does that not mean there are gaps between where the pole is and where the next boundary is?
No, this is one of the problems we have in many, certainly in less urban areas. There's no gap at all. The maximum gap allowed between a pole and a fence or a wall of a building is about just over 20 centimetres. And so that is why the pole's always at the back of the footpath adjacent to a fence or a wall, and always in the public domain generally.
Councillor Warren.
Can I ask a specific question about one of the sites where a pole's proposed to be erected? We had a look at it on a planning committee visit on the weekend, on Friday. So it's number 22 on the Parkland Walk, and there was kind of, it was proposed for there to be a small addition of fence before the pole, and we were just wondering when we looked at it why that was necessary, because it looked as though the pole could equally have just been put on where the existing wall ended.
It could have been put there, and we have an alternative proposal for it, but we anticipate that if it's too close to the wall, it might coincide with the footing of the wall, which might project. So we thought to keep it further away, and the picket fence matches the one opposite. And also at that point, at the end, between the end of the wall and the public footpath, it's a very steep embankment from the path itself up to the end of the wall. So we thought it was simpler if we could just put the pole a bit further away and have a matching 1200 millimeter wide picket fence to fill the gap, so that we don't exceed the maximum allowance of 20 centimeters or so.
Councillor Dunstall.
Thank you. I was just wondering whether you might be able to speak to some of the need for it to be a nylon one, whereas the objector has cited other examples where there isn't the nylon and that it is signed or whatever. Just speak to that in terms.
I couldn't quite understand what the objector referred to, but find that a nylon fishing wire is the strongest, and so least likely to break and need a repair, which is usually done on a Friday. In the very rare occasions is necessary. And experience has shown the 1.6 clear nylon is the least visible method of spanning from one pole to the opposite one. There are other materials, we've used Kevlar thread and things like that, but they are less reliable in extreme weather conditions.
Councillor Rice.
Yeah, can I ask who will maintain these erections, and how long would it, how frequently would that maintenance take place?
I can tell you that part of the area of rules from the religious point of view is that it has to be inspected at least once a week, and it's normally done before 8 o'clock on a Friday morning with a contractor on standby should any repair be necessary. And the poles themselves are also fully maintained as part of the Section 106 agreement, where the applicant takes on full responsibility for the costs of the installation and maintenance, and they're inspected at least once a week. So there's no question of dilapidation or them falling into disrepair.
Councillor Dunstall.
Sorry, I had another question, obviously. And I just wondered whether you could speak to some of the complexity or reasons why options for using existing street furniture are not feasible in this case.
Yes, first of all, we like to retain independence of the structure, because existing street furniture can be changed. We have no control over that, and it can be moved, which could invalidate the entire area. So we ideally prefer to keep it as a totally independent structure. In certain cases when there's one which was mentioned along Hampstead Lane by Ken Wood. It was a particularly sensitive area, and there the only way we can maintain the continuous boundary is by using lampposts, and we obtained a dispensation to do so in these cases where there was no other way of doing it. But from practical purposes, if the lampposts are changed, for example, it could prejudice the entire installation.
Councillor Corley Harrison.
Thanks, Chair. This might be for officers actually, but I was just wondering who's doing the installation and then any remedial work, around the paving when it's being installed and all that sort of thing. And a second question, in terms of the heights, I think kind of the opposite to the objector. Some of these are quite low, 2.4 meters on an entryway. If someone's on a bike, potentially, is there not standards for height that it has to be higher than for people to pass safely through? I'm thinking about Alexandra Palace, the bridge and that sort of thing.
Sorry, forgive me, I've forgotten your first question.
Who's performing the installation? Who's the contractor?
But that's subject to the legal agreement. Whether it's done, it has to be done obviously by a contractor who is licensed on the new streets and roadworks authority, have the qualification. So it can be done by the local authorities nominated contractor. Alternatively, the applicant has a member who has a contracting firm and has a requisite qualification to install the poles, which often they do, and other times it is done by the nominated contractor of the particular local authority. Sorry, on the height, I'm so sorry. The 5.5 meter height is about 300 above the recommended maximum height for commercial vehicles and buses, etc. And that gives generally good clearance. In certain cases, we go to 6 meters on TfL roads if they require it. Where there are arches or on footpaths and cycleways, whatever, which obviously don't have the vehicular height requirement, we generally go to a height of 2.4 meters, which is out of reach and much higher than a cyclist, and it will not impede anybody. And it's a normal height for arches or any other structure over public footpaths.
Councillor Warren.
Thank you. I just wondered if you could please clarify about the placement of the poles that are near the community gardens that have been referenced, because my understanding of the kind of latest plans is that none of them will actually encroach into a garden and they'll be outside. So just to address the concerns that were raised by the objector.
As I've mentioned, all the poles are placed at the rear of the footpath, which is land owned by the local authority, by the council. So the Section 106 agreement allows for all these poles to be licensed to be placed in the public domain. It will not impede or even extend into the public gardens at all.
Okay, thank you. Do members have any other questions? No? Okay, thank you. So we will now move to the recommendation, and I'd like to ask Robbie McKnocker to confirm the recommendation with a summary of any changes.
Thank you, Chair. No changes made to the recommendation, so that's as stands, which is to grant planning permission subject to a Section 106 agreement.
Okay, thank you. So we'll now move to the vote. All those in favour, please show. Yep, no abstentions and no one against. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Okay, thank you. So we now move on to item 9, and that's 550 White Hart Lane, and it's in the pack, pages 101 to 140. So I will hand over to the Planning Officer, James Mead, who will introduce the application. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Chair. So the application site is 550 White Hart Lane, also known as White Hart Works. 2 Section 73 applications are being reported to members. The first application seeks to vary or remove conditions 1, 4 and 6 of the 2020 planning permission. The second application seeks to vary or remove conditions 8, 22 and 23 attached to a 2014 consent. This is an aerial image which shows the full White Hart Works site edged in red. You'll see from this image that White Hart Works is occupied by 3 industrial buildings, together with the associated yard and parking areas. Unit 1 is located in the southwest corner of the site, whereas Unit 2 sits to the north, and Units 3 and 6 are found in the building to the eastern side of the site. To the west of White Hart Works are further industrial buildings at the recently built Segro development, whereas to the east there are blocks of flats and some commercial uses at the recently built 500 White Hart Lane. Opposite the site on White Hart Lane is Haringey Borough Football Club. Beyond the site to the north and northwest are residential properties on Norfolk Avenue and Devonshire Hill Lane. The site forms part of the White Hart Lane locally significant industrial site and is therefore designated for industrial and employment purposes. The provided image shows the extent of the locally significant industrial site, with the Segro development and St George's Industrial Estate to the west. These location plans and the aerial image identify the buildings that are subject of these applications. The first application relates to Unit 2, which is to the northern side of the site, whereas the second application relates to Units 3 and 5A, which occupy over half the floor space within the building on the eastern side of the site. This is an image of Unit 2. This unit currently has permission for light industrial, so use class E, and storage and distribution, use class B8, uses. This is an image of Units 3 to 5A. These units have consent for light industrial, so use class E, general industrial, so use class B2, and storage and distribution, so use class B8. The hours of working of Units 2 and 3 to 5A are not subject to any time restrictions. However, both Units 2 and Units 3 to 5A are subject to restrictions on delivery times. The first application relates to Unit 2 and seeks to vary or remove conditions attached to a 2020 planning permission. It's proposed to vary condition 1, the approved plans condition, so to allow the inclusion of the acoustic fence drawing in the approved plans list. This would facilitate the installation of an acoustic fence. In terms of condition 4, this condition currently restricts the use of this unit for solely light industrial and storage and distribution uses. It's proposed to vary this condition to allow Unit 2 to also operate as a B2 general industrial use. Condition 6 currently restricts deliveries so that it cannot be loaded or unloaded between 9 PM and 6 AM Monday to Saturday, or after 6 PM on a Saturday until 6 AM the following Monday. It's proposed to remove this condition so to allow unrestricted deliveries 24 hours, 7 days a week. The second application relates to Units 3 to 5A and seeks to vary or remove conditions attached to a 2014 consent. Condition 8 currently restricts deliveries for these units so they cannot be loaded or unloaded after 6 PM Saturday until 4 AM the following Monday. It's proposed to remove this condition to allow unrestricted deliveries 24 hours, 7 days a week. Delivery restrictions would remain in place for Units 1, 5B, 5C and 6. Condition 22 currently restricts loading and unloading in the outside spaces of Units 3 to 5A so this activity cannot be undertaken at night or at all on Sundays. It's proposed to remove this condition so to allow loading and unloading outside the units at any time. Condition 23 requires the permitted loading and unloading times to go back to the originally restricted hours following a specific business vacating the premises. It's proposed to remove this condition so that restrictions do not come back into force. To summarise the proposed changes, in terms of Unit 2, it's proposed to remove all time restrictions for loading and unloading. This would allow loading and unloading on a 24-hour basis, 7 days a week. It's also proposed to allow the unit to operate as a B2 general industrial use. And lastly, in terms of Unit 2, is proposed to install an acoustic fence to the western side of the unit. In terms of units 3 to 5A, it's proposed to remove all delivery, loading and unloading restrictions, allowing deliveries, loading and unloading on a 24-hour basis, 7 days a week. Turning to the assessment of the proposals. In terms of the principle of development, the removal of the delivery restrictions would ensure that all of the units are better suited to the operational needs of the modern industrial and warehousing sectors. In particular, it would enable deliveries to be made at off-peak times. This is important for prospective tenants as it would allow them to avoid undertaking deliveries at peak hours when there's greatest congestion on the roads. In terms of the B2 use of Unit 2, policy supports such uses in principle in locally significant industrial sites. Overall, the proposed changes to the operation of the units would increase the attractiveness and marketability of the units, and therefore the likelihood of securing long-term tenants for the units would be increased. In turn, the employment offer and opportunities on the site and the locally significant industrial site would be strengthened. Therefore, the proposals would be supported in principle as it would give rise to economic and employment benefits. In terms of noise and residential amenity, the proximity of residential properties to the north, west and east of the site is acknowledged. These properties are noise-sensitive uses. Therefore, a noise impact assessment and a noise survey report have been provided with the applications. These documents conclude that the changes to the activities at White Hart Works would not result in material noise or disturbance impacting nearby residential properties. The Council's Noise and Nuisance Manager has reviewed the application and accepts the results of the noise impact assessment and the noise surveys. Therefore, this constantee has not objected. The results of the noise impact assessment are reliant on the installation of the acoustic fence. Therefore, this is secured via condition. A noise management plan has also been provided by the applicant to further reduce the likelihood of any disturbance arising. The noise management plan includes measures such as restrictions on activities outside the units, restrictions on vehicular usage, and restrictions on the use of radios and public address systems. Turning to the appearance and design of the acoustic fence. The acoustic fence measures approximately 6 metres in height and would be located to the west of Unit 2. The acoustic fence is not considered to be of excessive size for the site and is industrial in character and therefore is in keeping with the character of the site. It's not considered there would be any harm to the character and appearance of the surrounding area. In terms of transport, the proposals will not result in a material uplift in the overall quantity of trips to the site. Therefore, the capacity of the highway network would not be compromised. The changes would facilitate off-peak deliveries, which would assist in limiting congestion at peak times. This is supported by policy. The overall site was purposely built for industrial uses. Therefore, there is not concern regarding the types of vehicles that might access the site. Highway safety would not be compromised. The Council's transportation officers have been consulted on the application and have not objected to the proposals. So in conclusion, the principal development is considered acceptable. The proposals would support the ongoing industrial use and employment use of the locally significant industrial site and would strengthen employment opportunities and the employment offer on the site. Therefore, economic and employment benefits would result from the proposals. The amenity and living conditions of nearby residential properties would not be materially harmed by noise or disturbance. The design of the acoustic fence would be in keeping with the industrial character of the area, and there are no adverse transport impacts that would result from the proposals. Therefore, its officers' recommendation to grant planning permission subject to conditions.
Thank you. Thank you, James. So I've got CouncillorOvat. Councillor Brennan, Councillor White to start off with. So Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Just 3 questions. Well, I'll be quite brief. Regarding the how the noise impact assessment was conducted, at the moment there are restricted delivery hours. So how does the testing accurately reflect noise levels? Should there be unrestricted delivery hours, especially in the early hours? Secondly, considering there are currently restricted delivery hours, with the proposed unrestricted delivery hours, would this not mean there would be potential for higher noise levels to the residential stretch of the road on White Hart Lane leading to the estate, especially in the early hours? And also with air pollution as well, would this not also mean increased air pollution? And thirdly, how will potential light pollution from vehicles, particularly in the early hours, be dealt with? Thank you.
Chair, we have our environmental health noise expert just available on the Teams call. If I could just perhaps bring her in, just explain how a noise assessment is approached to come to an accurate assessment of the impacts, please.
Good evening, Chair. I apologise for the visual. My camera's not in the best condition. So to answer the first question, and just before I start, can everyone hear me okay? Wonderful. Okay. So in response to the noise survey question, the noise survey can be carried out using modelled data or measured data. So you could go out and you can measure noise impacting a site using specialist equipment, and then that data is downloaded using specific software, and you can plug in or use other data from data sites, data libraries, to give a typical example of an HGV, the noise impacts from a lorry or the noise impacts from a car, and you can scale that up. So you can attend site, measure noise in a specific period. So for example, the latest noise survey measured from a Wednesday to a Sunday, each 5-minute interval, and determined the noise impacts from that survey. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
And I think, Jennifer, just in terms of how that is measured against the impact on residents, I think that's probably the other key strand to it, which I understand is that you then take how that sound travels over distance and make an assessment of where that would, level that would be when it reached neighbouring residential properties. Is that right?
That's correct. So you can actually, the data that you obtain, you can then plug into a model, and that enables you to determine the sound impacts over a specific distance. So for example, as sound travels, it obviously loses its impact, and you can determine that based on its proximity to sensitive receptors, noise sensitive receptors.
And I think just in terms of the question of will there be higher noise levels, the honest answer is that yes, this will increase the noise levels at night time because there will be activity that wouldn't have been previously permitted. The assessment we've made based on the expertise that's fed into this is that it wouldn't be significantly above background levels. So at that point, it's imperceivable. People won't appreciate it. They I think, really won't hear it. We are anticipating some increase because there will be vehicles that wouldn't have been permitted, but the impact of that is so small that it's of no significance to the residents.
And there are specific control measures outlined in the agreed noise management plan, which include restrictions on the number of vehicles that can use the site at any one time, how vehicles operate when they're in that area between 11 and 6. So there are some additional controls in the noise management plan also. And oops, sorry.
Go for it.
I was just going to answer the specific question about air pollution as well, which is it's a bit of a balancing act really, because you may in fact have greater impacts on noise pollution if you are using a number of lorries that can only access the site between time A and time B. Whereas if you're able to limit the impacts on the road network and decrease congestion, you actually have a positive impact on air pollution. So there is a balancing act there.
Did you want me to address the comment on lighting as well?
Yes, yes, please.
Okay, so the original planning permissions both have a condition on that restricted any external lighting, any additional external lighting. So the applicant would have to come to the council for approval for any additional external lighting.
And I think perhaps your question was in terms of the lorries and their headlights and things like that. I think it's worth bearing in mind that with what James said, that the site won't be in darkness. So there is 24-hour operation. So there will be lights on at night. So the lorry coming in won't be lighting up the residents' properties. It will be in the context of a lit up industrial site for operation and security reasons.
Thank you. Councillor Brennan?
So I have two queries. So obviously I accept the noise expert's assessment that the noise isn't excessive, not going to be very much above what it is now. What I can't quite understand is because if I was a resident who lived close by, I would be upset and I would think that there's going to be more noise, and you've said there will be more noise. So I can't quite understand. I know it's not absolutely necessary that you put a second acoustic fence up, but surely it wouldn't even be very expensive to put a second acoustic fence up on the other side. So if it were me, I would want to do the maximum possible to mitigate the noise. I know the noise isn't excessive by the rules, but if you can do anything to make it less, surely that would be good for the residents. That's my first thing. I don't understand why the decision has been taken not to put a second acoustic fence up. I don't understand why that wouldn't just think, well, we might as well make it as quiet as possible. Secondly, this thing about having no review, I don't understand why it's not possible to put that this thing that it should be reviewed. I don't. You'll explain it to me why it's not possible to say that this should be reviewed just in case, because the way it's set out is leaving it to the residents to complain, and residents, when you complain about noise, it takes a long time for anything to happen from my experience. Whereas if there was a review, it would make it much easier.
Chair, if I could, James is just going to share a location plan just to explain for Jennifer's benefit where Councillor Brennan is referring to in terms of a suggestion for an additional acoustic fence, and Jennifer, perhaps you can respond to why that wasn't deemed necessary, and it's probably also a question for the applicant of why they've chosen not to minimise the risk.
So it's proposed for an acoustic fence on the western side, so adjacent to Unit 2, so adjacent to the car parking area. But I think it's the area to the east of Unit 2 that you're referring to. So along the back here, if you can see my cursor there, I think that's.
Yep, I can see your cursor.
Sorry, go ahead, Jennifer. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I wasn't sure if you were going to say something else. Apologies. Yeah. So the assessment and model. Oh, sorry. Is someone speaking?
I think just a drop in signal, maybe. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So the original assessment had modelled where noise was going to be the most likely to be an issue, and that was determined to be that eastern site boundary. The western site boundary, the other side of the Unit 2. My understanding from the modelling was that there was going to be sufficient that noise impacts from the use of Unit 2 and the use of Unit 3A were not going to be an issue here because this area was so the area that the noise could pass through was relatively small. So in short, the modelling had determined the modelling undertaken had determined that this area was going to be significantly less impacted by noise from the use of the units, and that there was a sufficient boundary in existence already that was going to act as a barrier, and so that the fencing was not required. I'm certain the applicant can elaborate on that also.
I mean, I just wanted to say it's not that exactly. I mean, I agree what it sounds like. Yes, you've assessed that it's not absolutely necessary. It's more that I don't quite understand why the applicant, who knows they're going to be creating more noise in the area, doesn't want to go an extra length and just put up what seems to me, but I don't know about acoustic barriers, seems to me a relatively inexpensive extra barrier, which would, I would imagine, be welcomed by the neighbouring houses. I don't know, I might be wrong there.
Okay, well, let's ask the applicant that question when they come. Oh, okay, so.
Yes, and I think perhaps if the applicant's consultant maybe could give the numbers in terms of what the levels will be, that might explain the level of impact that there is potential for. Just in terms of the ability to sort of call the hours back in terms of what you're saying, why can't we have this sort of on review? I think with a lot of these things, there's a balance to be struck. We have a policy that supports the operations of businesses and enabling them to operate. So if someone signs a lease expecting 24-hour deliveries and is expecting to run their business on that model, it'd be quite a big risk for them to take, that could suddenly be swept away from them. We've tried to be proportionate to balancing those two issues with their operations and the neighbours. And have focused on what's set out in the noise mitigation plan, which is that if there are unforeseen issues or recurring noise issues, that there is a point of contact and opportunity to address those and for there to be that liaison with residents fairly rapidly. So we feel that's proportionate to get that balance right. And that's why we haven't taken the approach that only if there's absolute compliance can these hours be operated at.
I accept that.
Thank you, Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. So what we're being asked to consider today is the removal of a number of conditions that were applied to a permission previously granted regarding delivery times and use class, etc. And the report assures us that removal of these conditions will not adversely impact residents, that it will provide certain benefits to businesses that use this site. But what I'm kind of struggling with a little bit is that surely those things were the case at the time the original permission was granted. So what I'd like to ask is, what were the grounds, the reasons for applying those conditions in the first place, and what is it that's changed materially since that means that those conditions are no longer necessary?
Yes, it's an excellent question. It's really, having seen the site in operation, the market has indicated that this is essential for operations of units such as this. So it's really the impact of those benefits has increased since that decision was made. We've looked at the evidence in terms of noise, and there's an introduction of an additional mitigation in the forms of the acoustic fence, so that wasn't on the table before. So that's been able to balance those two things in a different way. So the mitigations were put in place probably because they weren't seen as an issue. They minimised the risk of these impacts, and they weren't seen to have a disbenefit to occupiers. But as time has moved on, it's been found that they are holding back the benefits of the development, and adequate mitigation can be put in place to avoid an impact on residents.
Mr. Corley Harrison.
Well, Matt asked an excellent question. That's exactly what I was going to ask. But I'm just wondering how many complaints have come in from residents about noise since it's gone through, because I note previous councillor Bull's comments about noise and residents raising that as an ongoing concern. Has that been a continued ongoing concern? And then the report doesn't include the noise survey. So what are the figures? You say that it's going to be imperceivable to people, but background noise in the daytime is a very different decibel level to background noise at night. So what are the numbers? Hopefully Jennifer has that. And what reduction does the acoustic barrier bring to bring those numbers down so that we can be assured that it is imperceivable? And on transport, there's no trip survey that I can see. I don't understand how opening up the hours to more vehicles can't possibly not result in more trips unless it's exactly the same operation, but they're spreading those trips out. But they're not doing that because they're saying that they're wanting to attract more and different types of businesses. So they must know what types of businesses they're looking for, and therefore the trips. And yet the transport team haven't done a trip survey. So I can't get my head around that. So if you can comment on that as well.
Chair, yeah, I think Reece go first, and then we'll bring in Jennifer on the noise question.
Sure, Chair. Hopefully you can hear me. So on the trip generation, Councillor Corley Harrison, normally we do trip generation based on floor areas. And in terms of the floor areas, they're not grossing up the floor areas. So essentially, you could say they can get a slight increase in terms of by efficiently getting things in and out. But because they're not increasing the floor area of the industrial estate, we can't then automatically assume that there's a large increase in the trip generation. So I think that I think what we're looking at here is how you service the development itself, in that you're right that you may be able to bring in a variety of goods in, but the shelf area, the sales area remain the same. You may have a slight increase in turnover in terms of people coming in and out of the car park, but it would be no different from what they're doing now. Maybe a slight increase. So if they were proposing to go up by another 25% in terms of floor area, sales area, storage area, then we can start looking at a much more substantial increase. But because that's not increasing, it will be minuscule in terms of the changes in terms of trip gen.
Sorry, Chair, can I just come back on that before we go over to noise? There is a change though, because they're requesting an additional use class. You couldn't argue that there'd be the exact same number of trips between a resi and a commercial just because the floor space is the same. So there is a material change that doesn't seem to have been considered.
Yes, Councillor, you're saying, well, there's a material change, but what you're talking about is light industrial and what is there already in terms of parking. So there's no change in terms of the number of parking spaces, and probably a slight change in terms of what it is the use classes, but it's all within that use class B8 stroke light industrial distributions and sales.
Yeah.
Yes, Jennifer, I think the question was, have there been any complaints since the occupied units have been in occupation, and perhaps some of the detail on what the numbers are, and if you don't have that to hand, I think we'll go to the applicant's noise consultant at some point shortly.
Firstly, I'd just like to add one quick point about the noise barrier, which was raised before. And the other point to mention is that the proximity of the nearest noise sensitive receptor also dictated where it was most appropriate to locate a noise barrier. So the area between the two units is a significantly greater distance from those units than the housing that's closest to Unit 2. So that's just one point I'd mention. And then the second point is that consideration and review of complaints is part and parcel of our considerations when we're thinking about responses to applications like this. We haven't had very much in the way of noise complaints, even prior to the changes to the even prior to the implementation of the new and updated planning conditions, which restricted the times that the site was used. So we had very little to go on in terms of neighbour complaints or potential impacts from those complaints. And so we've very much relied on our considerations, our thoughts around what's in the area currently and the mitigation measures that have been proposed. In relation to the second part of the question, I think it's probably easier for the acoustician, the applicant's acoustician, to whip through the assessment as it's been undertaken. What I can say is that the most recent assessment, so the initial assessment was undertaken in 2013, and the most recent assessment has identified that there's actually a reduction in background noise rather than an increase in the background noise levels.
Councillor Warren.
Thank you. Just a slightly similar question to one of Luke's questions. Has there been an assessment done of the expected kind of busyness at various times throughout the night? Were the hours to be completely opened up? Because I think having vehicles coming and going constantly during nighttime hours is a slightly different matter to them kind of being more sporadic. So I wondered if that had been looked into.
Yes, that forms part of the assessment. So noise was measured between the hours of 12:50 and even in the early hours of the morning as well for over a 4-day period. It measured using a worst case scenario, so had unit 2 operating pretty much throughout the noise assessment so that they could measure what noise might be like if that unit was operating 24 hours or certainly for much longer than 12 hours. And in addition, they also measured noise based on the worst noise scenario, which is the quietest background period, and also included an additional addition of 6 decibels to the whatever the measured noise was, so that they could account for things like impulsive noise or intermittent noise. So they used the worst case scenario for the second noise assessment survey.
Thank you. But I suppose that's slightly different to what I was kind of asking. Have we anticipated how many vehicles in reality, given the kind of commercial interest in the new hours, how many we actually think they'll be coming during the night, as opposed to sort of worst case scenarios and stuff like that?
I guess that's a question for, so the survey as it was undertook the operation of the unit and vehicles and forklifts using the outside area and measured the noise impacts from those activities. What I don't believe the survey's done is looked at that in terms of a significant number of vehicle movements or a set number of vehicle movements, but we've been able to measure or they've been able to measure the noise from the use of the unit and the use of the yard at the same time to give an idea of what that maximum noise might be. I guess the other part of your question is really kind of been answered by the highways officer.
And Jennifer, I think part of that point would be that there's only so much space in the site, so you could only get a certain number of lorries in at one point. So I think that's probably the basis for the worst case scenario is what you could actually fit really within the site and how it would operate.
Yes, and I'd also add that that's also another control measure, is that restriction on the number of vehicles is also a condition in the noise management plan.
Okay, thank you. So there are no speakers. So we'll move to questions. So we do have some questions for the applicant. The applicants are here, are they? Yes. So it's Wakako Haros, yeah, and Ed Fitch. Okay. All right. So I think we've got questions about the acoustic fence, the lack of the fence on the eastern side. I think I'm right in there. How many vehicles will there be during the night? How's all this going to be monitored in terms of noise levels, which will increase at night time? So those are some of the questions left over. And then I'm sure the committee will have other questions to ask you. But do you want to just address those points first? Thank you.
In terms of the acoustic fence, I'd like to ask our noise consultant who's actually attending virtually, because that was part of the modelling that has been undertaken. So I think he's best placed to answer that question. And in terms of number of vehicles, again, this is included in the worst case assumption that was made in noise assessment. And this site is not really intended to have lorries coming up and down all night. And the noise consultant can explain what sort of assumptions that were made based on the standard practice of undertaking noise assessment. And in terms of monitoring, the landowner who's present here, he represents the institution pension fund who owns the property. And the purpose is to make sure that this site remains commercially viable as an employment land. And as part of that, they do have managing agent who is basically a liaison between the landowner and tenants. And if there are any, and also residents as well, and if there are any complaints raised, they will firstly investigate what noise sources are, and then if necessary, they will contact the tenant to make sure that they resolve the issue. And if that doesn't happen, then they will escalate the matter. So there are measures in place as landowner who's experienced in managing sites like this to make sure that sites like this can actually coexist next to residential sites. So if you can just allow the noise consultant to answer the questions.
Okay, isn't the noise consultant yeah, okay.
Good evening, everyone. It's Adam Bamford from Cass Allen. I'm a principal consultant at the firm. The main question which I picked up there was why are we not including a noise barrier?
Can we just get, I can't hear you very well.
Can you hear me any better?
Well, I can't. Okay, thank you. And we can see you now as well. Thank you.
Is that okay? Please shout if you can't hear me very well. Right, sorry. So yes, to address the main question that I picked up was why is there not a barrier being placed in between Unit 2 and 3 currently? As the Environmental Health Officer indicated, effectively noise attenuates over distance. So a large function of that is where the noise source is relative to the receiver. In the case of the development here, what we've got is very effective screening from the existing buildings themselves. So they will reflect noise from the source back towards the site, in essence, as opposed to heading directly towards the sensitive receptors. And also there's quite a significant topographical change in level, which effectively means that the residential receivers are higher than the site itself in that area. So we did actually investigate putting a noise barrier in that area, same height, and it only makes a 2 decibel difference to those receivers in that area. So anything less than 3 dB will generally be regarded as imperceptible change outside of laboratory conditions. So if you put in theory, a 6 meter high fence would effectively not have any perceptible change to residents, whilst being a significant visual impact and obviously a cost associated with doing it without any real benefit. Whereas to answer your question about what benefit the barrier brings to the western side, without the barrier we'd be getting 57 decibels, with the barrier we get down to 44. So it's a significant reduction in that area of 13 decibels, which is a significant change in terms of that would be very noticeable to residents. So hopefully that answers the question on why barriers were included and why they weren't in certain areas.
Okay, thank you. So does the committee have any questions for the applicant? Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you. One of the things that the planning officers talked about was there not being any increase in the quantity of trips or visits to the site. I wonder if you could explain a bit about that in terms of, obviously the reason for making the changes is to make it more commercially viable. Why does that not involve more trips, basically? Thanks.
I'm not a highway consultant, so forgive me if I not technically answer the question. But effectively, if the operators have a requirement to deliver certain goods at certain time, and if they are condensed to kind of deliver within operational hours between, say, 8 till 6, for example, then it just needs to be, yeah. Then effectively, what this application does is to extend the hours that they can deliver. So if they have delivery first thing in the morning, that requirement would be gone during the day, if that makes sense. And effectively, this is trying to avoid peak time congestion issues. So it's basically trying to kind of minimize congestion, making sure that maybe one delivery that is needed at 6 would basically satisfy some of the delivery requirements. So allowing the operators to have flexibility to operate within extended hours. So it's not really intended, based on the floor area that's available, to kind of make this site like 24-hour distribution center that would operate in the same way as daytime and nighttime. Hopefully that makes sense.
So just on that basis, there's some sense from the papers that there is a need for this in order to make the site more attractive. Is that because it is competing with other sites that have that availability, or what is it that makes this necessary, basically?
Yeah, so as a landowner, the job is to make sure that this site is attractive to potential occupiers. And if potential occupiers, if there are 2 sites side by side, one with restriction, one without, they'll choose one without. And so basically it's not talking about now, it's talking about long-term future. So if the current occupier or any prospective occupier leaves, then it would make sure that the site remains occupied and quickly. So that's the kind of need for this application and proposal.
Councillor Corley-Harrison.
Yeah, just for the noise consultant, I'm just wondering whether you could give us the expected readings for daytime and nighttime, and then how you've considered, for example, reversing beeps and that sort of thing. Are we looking at above the 40 range, below the 40 range at night?
Yes, there is a variant in the noise report. There should be some figures in one of the appendix which shows a distribution of noise levels throughout the survey period that was done. So you've got daytime and nighttime. Apologies, I don't know how it is on your pack, but for example, the original Cass Allen report, it's in appendix 1 of that. You will notice it's unattended noise monitoring results from, originally it was 2013 data when we did our survey, and I know that the planning officer referred that there's been an updated survey carried out by Sharps Redmore. That showed that noise levels had reduced slightly, but even so, they still denoted that even with the reduction in noise levels, we would still be below significant adverse impacts, which would be normally a void. So we've got a slight increase in noise levels, which leaves us with some small adverse impacts, but those are mitigated by the noise management plan and the implementation of the noise barrier. Effectively, the original Cass Allen survey, we had it down as equal to background noise levels during nighttime. So these would be basically the same. Ultimately, the noise levels would be similar to what the background noise level at that prevailing time would be. And we've assessed that over a 24-hour period. Now we're slightly above with the reduction of the background noise levels, but with the noise management plan implemented, there would be no material increase in those noise affected by residents. Does that answer your question?
It does. I was after a figure, but that's fine. And I would say to officers, given the importance of noise, can we have the report in the pack in future rather than have to dig it out from the planning application? Because I suspect half the people here probably haven't realised that it's only in the planning application. So to answer your question, we haven't necessarily got the report at all in the pack.
Understood. I mean, in terms of numbers, 44 was the number that we had as terms the lowest at nighttime. Daytime levels are much higher. They generally range somewhere between 50 and 55. If you can appreciate, and now 90 varies throughout the 24-hour period, so there's no single figure. But what we typically do is when assessing the worst case period when this could operate, we pick the typical lowest. So to ensure that you've got a robust and conservative assessment that's been done.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, does the committee have any more questions? Okay. Oh, sorry, Councillor White, sorry.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, I was a bit late putting my hand up. I'm just wondering what the landlord of the site is planning to do to kind of keep tabs on how the tenants are using the site in a way that isn't going to impact the residents, because residents have raised quite a lot of concerns about the impacts of noise. I know a lot of that's been addressed today. So if you could say something about that.
So in terms of this noise management plan, that will be part of any negotiation on lease. So if any tenants who wish to deliver at night time, they would have to adhere to this noise management plan. And as I said earlier, managing agent will be available to make sure that any complaints are dealt with, and in consultation with your environmental health officers as well. And also the contact details for the tenant and also agent will be provided to residents. That's in a commitment in the noise management plan.
Okay, thank you. So there are no other questions. So we'll now move to the recommendation, and I'll just hand over to Robbie McNocker to confirm the recommendation with a summary of any changes.
Thank you, Chair. No changes following discussion, so the recommendation is as set out in the report and the addendum, which is to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move to the vote. All those in favour, please show. Okay, all those against? Thank you. And any abstentions? Okay, so that's okay, so that's in favour. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, okay, so we'll have a quick 5-minute break. Okay, thank you. So we're all back. So we're now on to item 10, and that's the Hale London. That's pages 141 to 556 in the pack. And I will hand over to the planning officer, Philip Elliott, to introduce the application. So over to you, Phil.
Thanks, Chair. This is an application for the Hale, a site in Tottenham Hale near to the station. Members should be aware of the addendum report that was circulated earlier this evening, which includes updates on procedural matters, plan changes and updates to Appendix 5, additional consultee responses and updates and corrections to the report and Appendix 4. So members made a resolution to grant planning permission for a very similar development on the 5th of September last year. This was subject to the signing of a Section 106 legal agreement. This matter has come back to the committee because, firstly, after the resolution to grant planning permission, further representations were received from the Health and Safety Executive, or HSE. The government also subsequently launched a consultation on amendments to building regulations on the 23rd of December last year. This proposed mandatory second staircases in buildings over 30 metres in height. Accordingly, the GLA now require all planning applications which involve those buildings of 30 metres plus to be designed to provide 2 staircases before they're referred to the Mayor for decision at stage 2. Secondly, in light of discussions with the HSE, the applicant has amended the scheme to include a second staircase. And thirdly, because reconsultation has taken place as set out in the report. So the committee resolution last September has therefore been overtaken by these developments, and a fresh decision needs to be taken now. So a bit more on background. Sage Housing, through their representative, submitted a letter dated 17th of November last year, which asserted that the scheme should be reconsidered by members on sort of numerous grounds relating to errors of law. A further letter has been received this evening, which was circulated to members. This was not captured in the addendum, but this letter raises similar concerns and no new matters for consideration. All the points that have been raised by Sage have been addressed at page 159 of the officer report in the pack and by the addendum report and in Appendix 4. No errors in law have been made. Other than the Sage Housing objections and those issues relating to means of escape and fire, there have been no material changes in circumstances since the committee resolved to grant planning permission last year. So onto the changes. The main changes are internal. An additional stair and evacuation lift has been added between levels 24 and the ground floor. This has resulted in 20 rooms of student accommodation being removed from the scheme. The total room numbers would be 431 rooms of student accommodation now, which equates to 172 homes for counting houses purposes. 15% of the rooms in total would be accessible rooms in accordance with the British Standard and London Plan requirements. There would be reductions to amenity spaces and shared kitchens, as well as the gym, and a small decrease in the size of the retail units. There are also small elevational changes, which involve a small change to just add a door onto the Hale and window readjustments, just to reflect the internal changes to the stair. Whilst the changes reduce the total room numbers and slightly alter the design, these changes are largely modest and almost all internal alterations. The external dimensions of the building and its envelope would remain the same size and scale as the scheme that members reviewed last year. So the changes themselves would have a near identical impact on neighbouring buildings as that scheme reviewed last year. So just to try and talk through the elevational changes, in case you spot the difference, it's It's a really minor change that the windows are just shifted slightly, and that's just to accommodate the additional stair internally. So the picture to the left just shows the southeast elevation that members reviewed last year, and then the current scheme on the right. This is the same case here. There's just a very minor change from the scheme reviewed last year, and then the scheme that's currently under consideration. It's just the shift of a door to deal with the changes to the means of escape. Again, these just floor plan changes. So these show the ground floor, and you can just see how within the red sort of oval there, where the additional stairs included. And as you go up the building, you can see how the stairs included, but also that sort of small impact it has on the amenities within the building, such as the gym in this location. And again, on the 7th floor, you can just see how that community space is just reduced slightly in order to accommodate the additional stair and evacuation lift. So onto the summary, the proposal is very similar to the scheme that was reviewed last year. The payment in lieu of on-site affordable housing remains £6,525,654. The changes improve means of escape and fire safety. They would have a near identical impact on neighbouring buildings, and the changes would bring the building in line with emerging fire safety and legislation. And the Health and Safety Executive have considered the proposals and are content with the scheme. So just on to the recommendation, it is relevant that members decided to resolve to grant planning permission for a very similar scheme last September. But as a matter of law, the subcommittee must now make a fresh decision. Since the date, obviously, we've had the further representations by the HSE, the amendments, and then the reconsultation on the scheme. The subcommittee should keep in mind the public interest in consistent decision making. However, if they wish to make a different decision in light of the changes made, or because they take a different view on the overall merits of the case, then they can do so. Your task is just to decide whether the scheme, which is before you now, should be granted planning permission. For the sake of good order, officers recommend that the resolution dated last year should be revoked so that only the amended scheme can be granted or refused planning permission. So you'll be making a fresh decision in respect of the amended scheme, which is now proposed, and that recommendation is set out from page 142 of the pack and in the addendum report. And in summary, that's the grant planning permission subject to the signing of the Section 106 legal agreement. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. So there are questions of clarification. So Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. I hope I'm not doing something wrong in asking about something that isn't necessarily about the changes that have happened, but I just wondered if officers are confident that that what we agreed last time, that the delivery and serving plan will set out measures for managing moving in and out to avoid congestion in the area is sufficient to deal with the fact that 2 loading bays didn't seem to many of the committee members last time to be sufficient to deal with people, lots of students coming in and out in a very short space of time. Is that really adequate?
Yeah, so on the meeting last time that was raised, and it was added to the condition. So they had to provide details and information of how that would be managed on the day. So that's part of the delivery and servicing plan condition, that moving in and out would be specifically addressed.
Okay, it just does seem to me to be quite difficult to imagine how that can happen with just 2 loading bays. It's not like you can kind of force people to arrive at a particular time.
I think that's what the condition can have the capacity to do. They would have to show us exactly how that would work. So Whether that's staggered over a number of days or they have specific time slots, I think that would have to be managed, and we would have to see the details of that. So it's in condition 30. I'm just trying to find the page, but there's a specific line that just talks about the inclusion of 491. Yeah, so it specifically talks about how to identify how moving in and out would work. So that's part D of that condition.
If I just may add to that, Chair, I recall the applicant last time explained how this is a common situation with student accommodation occupiers in terms of managing, large numbers of people arriving, and so that needs to be managed. So this site is not unique across the country and across London in having a constrained urban environment, limited loading bays, and being able to manage that. A student occupier would be able to manage this, and that's not uncommon actually beyond this site.
Do you want to come back, Councillor White, on that?
No, not at all. No. Just, I mean, I can't imagine how it's going to work on the day, but we'll see, won't we?
Okay, all right, Councillor Over.
Thank you, Chair. My question is a bit about the lifts. I understand that there are various lifts planned to be installed at this site: passenger lift, evacuation lift, and firefighting lift. My understanding is that out of all those lifts, the firefighting lift is the best one, and there isn't much of a cost difference between each of these lifts. So in such a case, why cannot the best lift be installed at all lift locations?
The London plan specifically sort of requires the evacuation lift to be separate. So I think that is a separate thing that has to happen. And that's why that particular lift isn't a firefighting lift. So it's just to comply with policy.
Councillor Warren.
Thank you. Is the amount that we're receiving, the affordable housing payment in lieu, is that decreasing because the number of overall occupancy in the new version is decreasing?
No, so it's exactly the same. Yeah, mainly just because there was a rationale before about avoiding a late stage review. So essentially, by keeping it as it is, then it just means that the equivalent payment is slightly more than it was previously. So I think it was around 40% equivalent to on-site affordable before, and now it's sort of just over 40%, 41%. So it's just been maintained.
Councillor Raleigh.
Will the installation of stair lifts satisfy the requirement for having 2 exits? I understand it should be 2 stairways. If you have 2 lifts, is that the same or combination of 2 stairways?
Yeah, so there's multiple stairways in the building. There's also the sort of 7-story element of the building that has a stairway. And so there's multiple exits within the building. But
Yeah, my question, the regulation says you must have 2 foot stairways. If you have a lift instead of a stairway, would that satisfy the requirement? So you could have 2 lifts or 2 stairways, or 1 lift and 1 stairway.
the key is the additional stair, just in case. It has to be an additional staircase, because obviously in the event of a fire and the lift is not operational, then they need to use the addition. Yeah, they've added an additional stairway, but there is also an additional lift there as well that they've provided.
The regulation says it must be 2 stairways. I'm simply asking, in this building arrangement, can there be a lift instead of a stairway?
Well, there was the existing stairway and lifts, and then they've added another stairway to deal with the regulations, and there's also the evacuation lift as well. So it has sufficient means of escape. Well, they have the two in the main tower of the building, but there is also another stairway in the 7-storey part of the building as well.
There's 3 stairways.
There are, yeah.
That stairway is not listed.
There's more lifts than that. So there's the 2 with the original stairway, and then there's another lift with the additional staircase, and then there's another staircase in the 7-storey part of the building. So 3 stairways and 3 lifts, but there's 2 lifts next to each other in the main core of the building. But it meets the requirements for means of escape. I think that's the key point.
Okay, thank you. So are there any more questions for the planning officer? Councillor Corley-Harrison.
I think it was this. We discussed the HSE concerns last time, and it seems like I know that the stairwell is a kind of half separate resolution of sorts, but they have still got these other concerns, and officers last time were kind of confident that the concerns were concerned, but you guys weren't concerned or whatever. Given how things have progressed, and we're now reviewing this again based around fire safety and changes there, are you confident again that those same concerns that HSE have raised once again are not so significant that you should be drawing it to our attention more than just it's in an appendix in the report, really?
No, I think there's been a shift in national policy, which has kind of led that as well. So I think the HSE freely admit that they changed their opinion, and so it's moved on since then. And obviously now the GLA are saying they require this as well. So the applicants worked with the HSE, been in meetings with them to discuss how to improve that. That's where the second staircase has come about. And that's why they've now changed their sort of response to content, because they're happy that what's being proposed meets their requirements.
I think just to add, we weren't expecting further comments from them, so they came after the resolution, which isn't normal practice. So we wouldn't expect that to happen again. And then alongside that, another change in national guidance and GLA position. So that was just a very unique set of circumstances.
But sorry, unless I missed something, they're still concerned, right? That's their position, is concern. No? So where's the update to concern?
So there was their initial comment, and then we had the meeting, and then they changed their comment from some concern to significant concern. And now, since they've accommodated the second stair, that's gone down to content, and they're happy with the scheme.
But they haven't done a formal submission. We don't have a formal in writing version of that.
We do, yeah.
Where's that?
It's so in summary, the summary of the report on page 142 says the HSE have considered the scheme and are content with the proposals. So that's the first place it appears, and then it appears in a couple of other places as well, which I'm sure Phil's trying to find the page.
But yeah, sure. It's in the report, but we don't have a written feedback update statement, consultation response kind of thing.
There is one on the website, but it's not in the packet. So.
Oh right, okay, all right.
Right, any other questions? Okay, so as there are no speakers, we'll move to questions. Do members have any questions for the applicant? No? Okay. Okay, so we'll move to the recommendation. Hand over to Robbie McNaught.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so recommendation is that members revoke the previous decision to grant planning permission and make a fresh decision to again grant planning permission subject to referral to the GLA and a Section 106 agreement. And there's been no changes during discussions.
Okay.
In sort of making your decision to make another decision, that in effect would revoke the permission.
Right. Okay. So we are Okay, so we're voting, so
So you're voting to follow the resolution, which has those component parts of revoking and then issuing a fresh decision, really, if that's clear.
Must we not first have to revoke the previous permission before we take anything further forward?
Yes, so paragraph 2.8 adds in page 8 of the addendum adds that additional limb to the decision that you're making. So you've made a previous resolution and we're asking you to make another resolution and another decision, and in that resolution you would be revoking the permission and issuing a fresh decision.
right, so we just have one vote in favour of the proposal, okay? All right, so, and the recommendation is to grant. So all those in favour, please show. Okay, anyone against? Any abstentions? Okay, so that's granted. Thank you very much. Thank So we now move on to item 11, which is update on major proposals. That's pages 557 to 572. This is to note. You can direct any questions to Robbie McKnocker if you've got any, which Councillor Corley-Harrison does.
As in, we can ask now to Rob. We can ask Robbie or John now.
Are we asking the questions now, or are they for you for later to email you?
I think practice is you ask them now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on Linton Road and progress on that, because I'm aware that the other part of the site allocation has now it's on consultation, and that in itself is an application with only 9 units, so just under the affordable threshold. But obviously bringing both together, would change things. So I'm just wondering on the status of that. That's got quite a lot of commercial space, how that impacts site allocation and how you're managing the two coming forward in a cohesive manner.
Yeah, an excellent question. So part of our policy for sites within site allocations is that there is engagement with neighbouring landowners to ensure that the site allocation comes together as a whole. We've put that question to the applicant, what have you done and where's your engagement and your evidence that these two come together. We're not at the moment satisfied with what they've said. The application, they've asked for it to be registered and go ahead, but we will be pressing them on that and speaking to both landowners to ensure that they come together collectively. The 9-unit question, comes up again and again, and we're never naive to it, but we have limited scope to control that issue. But given that there doesn't seem to be any collaboration, I don't think it's an issue of chopping up a parcel of land into separate pieces to avoid affordable housing. So we will be pushing to make sure that the two sites can come together cohesively. We're not yet satisfied that that is the case, and we'll continue to push that.
If I may, 2 follow-ups. One, based around the Hornsey application with the large commercial space. Was it last meeting, I think, where there was restrictions on if they were to go over 9 in future? I'm sure that you'll be minded to consider that on that one. And does the amount of commercial space on this one impact what you're asking potentially from the other site allocation? Because it's quite a lot.
Potentially, because we haven't seen the full picture from both applicants to be able to make that assessment, we're not there yet. I suppose the starting position is re-provision, so we need to do the sort of calculations to work out whether we're satisfied with that, and then look at what the site allocation anticipated. But if one site overprovided on commercial, that could allow another to provide less. But we'd want to see that they were both working together to come to that position, which we haven't seen it at the moment.
Councillor Rice.
Just asked at the last meeting about the lock keepers cottages at Tottenham Wharf on the Lee. And it was said that nothing had gone forward since permission granted some time ago. I've got a local resident who's been bombarding me with concerns about the site being heavily dumped, and no one seems to know how to sort it out. I believe the site belongs to the Canals and River Trust, not Haringey, or not the Lee Valley, but that's only my approach to it. I could be wrong on that.
So I'm not aware of that issue. We have recently been speaking to Lee Valley Estates about their sort of wider programme of works. We can raise that with them if the site has become a problem, and we do have some enforcement powers to address, dumped and blighted sites. You've raised the case already, have you? Okay, well, so it'll be in process. Yeah, I just wasn't aware of it. Lee Valley Estates, as I understand, had to buy the remainder of the site from Canals and Rivers Trust, and the Lee Valley Regional Park, I think, had some ownership there as well, potentially. So I understood that they had to gather all of those ownerships together to allow them to build it, which held up the decision on that for a long time. So I would expect that it's in one single Lee Valley Estates ownership now. But I can get some clarification when I'm next speaking to them.
Okay, thank you. So now on to item 12, applications determined under delegated powers. That's pages 573 to 594. And that's to note, unless there are any questions. No, okay. So we have no new items of urgent business, and the date of the next meeting is the 11th of May 2023. So I hereby close the meeting and thank you all very much. Thank you.